There exist certain individuals who exit your existence not because their feelings gradually diminished. They leave because what they felt expanded into something they could not manage. And I need you to truly absorb what I'm about to share. Because someone who experiences profound connection maintains distance for a single reason. A reason so unspoken, so imperceptible that people navigate their entire existence without grasping it. Perhaps you've encountered this. The quietness, the emotional withdrawal, the unexplained separation from someone whose gaze once regarded you like you were the fulfillment of an unspeakable longing. What I'm about to communicate may fundamentally reshape how you perceive affection, suffering, and what it means to care. There exists a quality of connection that possesses no tranquility, an attachment so overwhelming that it destabilizes how someone perceives their own identity. People commonly imagine connection naturally brings individuals closer, yet psychology reveals something entirely different. Sometimes the most profound connection generates separation first. Sometimes someone withdraws emotionally, not because what he felt grew weaker, but because it became uncontrollably intense. Jung examined what he termed the shadow, the concealed territory of consciousness harboring dread, self-doubt, injuries, and suppressed realities. When someone genuinely connects, not through appearance or physical attraction alone, but with another's inner world, his shadow activates. Suddenly the battle isn't external anymore. It becomes internal. Consider this. Most people spend their formative years absorbing how to endure, never learning authentic feeling. Since early development, many internalized that expressing emotion communicates inadequacy, that revealing vulnerability signals jeopardy, that needing someone indicates forfeiture of control. So genuine attachment doesn't merely touch consciousness. It reveals every wound buried beneath decades of emotional suppression. A woman might interpret his withdrawal as diminished affection, but frequently something considerably more complex is operating. He separated because her presence generated sensations he couldn't regulate. That single characteristic creating this separation isn't her appearance, isn't her language, isn't the relationship itself. It's the magnitude of what he experiences when she's present. The force of those sensations terrifies him beyond articulation. Someone experiencing genuine connection frequently doesn't fear losing her. He fears being consumed by emotions she generates within him. Certain individuals enter existence and create steadiness, reliability, conventional safety. Yet occasionally someone arrives who touches your essence without attempting to. Their being reaches territories you've secured for years. When someone experiences this caliber of attachment, internal shifts commence. His reasoning becomes more intense. His anxieties sharpen. His yearning becomes almost painful. Every message carries weight. Every pause feels significant. Each chance of dismissal registers like catastrophe. Rather than moving toward her, he withdraws. What's tragic is how this retreat frequently registers as indifference, when truthfully it's emotional flooding. Someone incapable of deep feeling can maintain casualness. He can engage playfully without vulnerability. He can express himself without internal shaking. Yet someone who genuinely experiences profound connection becomes psychologically vulnerable. That vulnerability terrifies someone who spent his whole existence shielding his inner landscape behind invisible barriers. This explains why certain men grow more closed following genuine attachment, not because his passion evaporated, but because managing it became impossible. He initiates scrutinizing every interaction. He dissects every statement. He becomes paralyzed by potential of revealing excess, demonstrating excess, wanting excess. Gradually, almost unconsciously, he manufactures separation as an emotional defense mechanism. A painful contradiction lies within masculine experience. The stronger his attachment, the more vulnerable he becomes to hurt. Yet managing vulnerability isn't something most men received instruction on. Society honors disciplined men, rational men, fearless men. Yet nobody demonstrates what happens when his consciousness becomes dependent on another's presence. Nobody teaches him managing affection that keeps consciousness awake. Nobody instructs him handling terror of losing someone who transformed into emotionally irreplaceable. So he selects quietness, separation, withdrawal, because creation feels more manageable than exposure. Occasionally, someone disappears for stretches, not because she became insignificant, but because he's struggling to reclaim equilibrium over sensations that have become overwhelming. He remains isolated, replaying exchanges internally. He interrogates why her non-existence affects him so profoundly. He attempts comprehending how her presence simultaneously calms and devastates him. The stronger the connection feels, the more his terror of his own reliance escalates. This explains why profoundly emotional attachment typically creates bewilderment before clearness. The consciousness acknowledges the attachment immediately, yet consciousness becomes alarmed because this caliber of affection reorganizes everything. Certain individuals have previously experienced disloyalty, abandonment, public humiliation, or deprivation before encountering the person they now care for profoundly. Those previous traumas don't simply cease when affection arrives. Authentic attachment frequently reactivates dormant trauma. When someone genuinely becomes significant, every previous wound resurfaces. The terror of rejection intensifies. The fear of insufficiency amplifies. The dread of psychological devastation becomes nearly unbearable. Rather than confronting this exposure, numerous individuals unconsciously generate distance. They persuade themselves they require space. They convince themselves separation will facilitate clarity. Yet internally, they're truly attempting to escape the magnitude of his own sensations. Psychology operates peculiarly. We habitually flee from precisely what we desire. Jung theorized that what we oppose internally dominates us from obscurity. For numerous individuals, profound connection triggers internal struggles they never anticipated. They might project composure externally while experiencing inner turbulence. He might present emotional unavailability while considering the identical individual every evening. He might maintain detachment while harboring attachment so significant it shapes his entire consciousness. This inconsistency creates relationship confusion because external presentation doesn't consistently mirror internal experience. What inflicts greatest harm is that certain individuals genuinely imagine withdrawal constitutes safeguarding. They imagine they're defending her from his bewilderment, his emotional fragility, his unresolved damage. He fears becoming harmful. He fears disappointing her. He fears failing to fulfill connection's demands. So he retracts, believing silence will simplify managing sensations. Yet emotions concealed never truly vanish. They proliferate in obscurity. They accumulate heaviness with time. Eventually, the separation itself becomes agonizing. There's something profoundly spiritual regarding being cherished by someone unable to communicate it fully. Their silence harbors unexpressed turbulence. Their sight communicates sensation their language hesitates to articulate. Occasionally they regard you like you're their spiritual destination. Subsequently, moments later, they withdraw into emotional isolation. This conduct can appear unkind if misunderstood. Yet typically it's not cruelty. It's emotional self-preservation. Someone who never developed capacity for managing extraordinary emotional intensity naturally generates distance once attachment becomes overwhelming. Yet the most devastating aspect involves this. Numerous relationships dissolve not because attachment vanished, but because terror surpassed communication. Two individuals can experience profound affection while simultaneously completely misinterpreting each other. One perceives silence as dismissal. The other employs silence for defense. One yearns for confirmation. The other suppresses sensation from apprehension. Progressively, the attachment becomes imprisoned beneath protective barriers, stress, unprocessed experience, and unspoken realities. This illustrates why psychological development matters beyond passionate intensity. Profound connection without psychological consciousness becomes harmful. You should comprehend something crucial regarding individuals capable of extraordinary emotional depth. Their attachment is seldom superficial. When they care, the commitment is complete. Yet because their consciousness operates at depth, they commonly fear emotional rupture more intensely. They might appear distant, yet internally they're significantly bonded. They might reject vulnerability publicly, while internally desiring emotional intimacy perpetually. The actual problem isn't sensation's non-existence. It's inability to manage sensation's magnitude without becoming submerged. Someone experiencing genuine, profound connection frequently observes the individual she cares for carefully. He recognizes her smallest emotional variations. He preserves details she's overlooked. He carries her consciousness into unremarkable occasions without speaking of it. Melodies remind him of her. Lonely evenings remind him of her. Accomplishment feels incomplete without her. Even his quietness fills with considerations of her. Yet because emotional intensity intimidates him, he conceals these experiences behind emotional separation. He fears that acknowledging his attachment's magnitude would result in complete psychological disintegration. And possibly that represents the most fundamental reality present in all of this. Authentic connection generates psychological metamorphosis. It's not simply romance, it's transformation. It compels concealed pain to surface. It exposes self-uncertainties we've avoided. It questions consciousness's belief in self-sufficiency. Yet numerous individuals remain unprepared for connection's psychological consequences. They anticipate sensation, enthusiasm, exhilaration. Yet they don't prepare for psychological restructuring, emotional turmoil, soul-level awakening, and the frightening openness genuine connection requires. Occasionally, the toughest individuals experience emotional fragility encountering authentic connection. Not from weakness, but because genuine psychological closeness removes protective barriers. And underneath every barrier exists someone hungering to be witnessed without judgment. Numerous individuals never acquired language for describing emotional flooding in constructive ways. So rather than expressing, "I experience such profound affection for you that it frightens me," they merely grow withdrawn. Rather than acknowledging, "I experience terror of separation from you," they perform emotional distance. Rather than confessing, "Your significance to me has become extraordinary," they vanish into quietness. When you've treasured someone behaving this way, you understand the anguish. One instant you experience psychological harmony with their consciousness. Subsequently, they seem unreachable. Their contradictory presentation generates confusion because their presence communicates something while their actions communicate something different. Yet individuals exist in complexity. We're not perpetually emotionally synchronized with our conduct. Trauma, apprehension, disgrace, self-uncertainty, and previous hurting distort how individuals experience and share affection. Certain individuals pursue connection enthusiastically, others instinctively retreat. Both originate from fear, and fear possesses tremendous power. It persuades someone that separation indicates safety. It deceives him that psychological withdrawal shields from heartbreak. It silences expressions desperately wanting emergence. Yet fear additionally generates isolation because consciousness wasn't engineered to inhabit perpetual separation from genuine psychological connection. Fundamentally, every individual yearns for recognition, comprehension, reception, and cherishment without needing emotional disguises. There exist hours after darkness when someone experiencing profound connection sits isolated with consciousness he cannot articulate to anyone. He reminisces about her humor, her vitality, how her being influenced the environment. He cycles through exchanges repeatedly, contemplating whether to attempt contact or persist, pretending he experiences nothing. His self-image instructs him to persist in distance. His genuine self implores him to come back. Inside this inner conflict, he endures more than many realize, because repressing sensation doesn't erase attachment. It confines it internally, where it gradually transforms into stress, agitation, sorrow, and emotional depletion. Numerous individuals maintaining emotional distance are not emotionally hollow. They're emotionally inundated. There's a distinction. Someone emotionally barren experiences nothing. Someone emotionally overflowing experiences excessively and lacks capacity to work through it securely. When someone lacks psychological resources, separation becomes their response mechanism. They vanish not because attachment ceased, but because attachment's force triggered fears he never processed. This clarifies why psychological consciousness represents among life's most significant developmental pursuits. Lacking inner awareness, attachment becomes disorganized. Lacking emotional sincerity, relationships become confusing. Lacking rehabilitation, individuals transfer previous hurting onto fresh connections. Someone who hasn't engaged with his inner doubts might unintentionally ruin the exact attachment his consciousness desires, not from intention to harm her, but from unconsciously attempting to defend against imagined psychological devastation. Yet contained within this anguish lives something genuinely lovely, because it demonstrates consciousness retains vitality. It verifies attachment retains capacity to reshape individuals beyond reason. In an existence where numerous connections turn superficial, transactional, and emotionally dormant, profound attachment persists as sacred. Frightening, certainly. Complicated, undoubtedly. Yet sacred nonetheless, because when someone connects with your consciousness profoundly enough to trigger both affection and terror simultaneously, the attachment surpasses superficial interaction. The hazard emerges when this dynamic gets completely misunderstood. Certain women invest years blaming themselves for someone's emotional distance, presuming they lacked attractiveness, lovability, or value. Yet frequently the separation carries little relevance to their significance. Occasionally, the individual simply triggered sensations so profound he couldn't contain them, and rather than acquiring capacity to navigate emotional depth maturely, he escaped. This doesn't indicate emotional distance warrants endless acceptance. Connection still necessitates discussion, commitment, accountability, and emotional accessibility. Suffering doesn't justify harmful conduct. Yet comprehending the psychology underneath emotional withdrawal permits regarding individuals with greater understanding. Not all withdrawn individuals are emotionally barren. Certain individuals are wounded beings navigating emotional depths they received no instruction on. There's a spiritual isolation present in numerous individuals that culture seldom examines. Isolation created by decades of emotional restriction. Numerous received instruction to generate, attain, outperform, and make it through, yet never learned expressing emotional openness without humiliation. So, when genuine attachment enters, it collides forcefully with lifelong emotional programming. Aspect of him yearns to relinquish himself to the attachment. Another part desperately attempts to preserve emotional governance. This inner conflict frequently generates the separation that destabilizes relationships. You might perceive that individuals experiencing genuine, profound connection sometimes remain at distance. They preserve psychological connection even following bodily separation. They quietly monitor whether she's functioning adequately. They contemplate reaching out with greater frequency than she realizes. Because authentic psychological connections don't simply disappear. Consciousness retains what consciousness attempts to suppress. Genuine attachment creates psychological imprints persisting long after physical separation manifests. Yet embedded within this agony exists a more fundamental knowledge. Attachment alone fails when apprehension directs the relationship. Emotional profundity without emotional bravery becomes self-damaging. Eventually, someone must determine whether he'll persist escaping behind apprehension or mature into the psychological development authentic closeness demands. Because attachment cannot endure permanently within silence. Ultimately, realness must be articulated. Openness must be received. Emotional barriers must dissolve. Otherwise, even the most extraordinary attachment gradually gets smothered beneath unspoken sensation. And perhaps you consuming this currently have invested nights interrogating why someone obviously cherishing you grew withdrawn. Possibly their sight embodied affection while their conduct generated confusion. Possibly their quietness damaged you more profoundly than explicit rejection ever would. Yet recognize this genuinely. Individuals communicate their psychological health through how they encounter attachment. Certain individuals escape. Certain individuals resist. Certain individuals discuss. Certain individuals vanish, and each response communicates something about internal warfare. Someone who's recovered doesn't fear psychological intimacy. He recognizes openness represents not fragility but courage. He discusses instead of retreating. He persists emotionally present instead of concealing behind silence. Yet someone bearing wounds habitually mistakes emotional magnitude for hazard. The stronger his sensations, the more his consciousness perceives his own vulnerability as danger. Until he consciously engages those apprehensions, he might persist recreating separation patterns, regardless of the individuals included. Existence possesses a peculiar method of positioning us, confronting connections, revealing our profoundest truths. Certain individuals materialize not merely to cherish us, yet to stimulate us, to illuminate regions of ourself still imprisoned by apprehension, to propel us into psychological metamorphosis. And while this experience brings suffering, it's additionally sacred because transformation originates where avoidance concludes. The reality is, numerous individuals are starving for profound connection while simultaneously terrified of it. They desire nearness yet dread exposure. They want affection yet fear abandonment. They long for comprehension yet conceal genuineness. This paradox characterizes so much human distress. We construct protective barriers trusting they'll safeguard us, only discovering those identical structures imprison us internally. When someone treasures you genuinely, his distance carries subtlety. Underneath often exists longing, apprehension, bewilderment, emotional flooding, unprocessed experiences, and quiet internal conflicts you'll never completely perceive. This doesn't indicate you should endlessly pursue someone or forfeit yourself attempting rehabilitation. Yet it signifies human conduct contains more psychological intricacy than appearances communicate. Occasionally, the most frigid quietness harbors the most intense affection. Occasionally, the broadest distance contains the most profound connection. And possibly this explains why human attachment simultaneously breaks and beautifies us. We're all transporting invisible narratives, previous injuries, forgotten treacheries, overlooked heartbreaks, concealed uncertainties, and genuine attachment simultaneously touches every hidden territory. Certain individuals access psychological courage. Certain individuals revert to apprehension. Yet regardless, attachment exposes who we genuinely become beneath the characters we perform. Eventually, someone who invested years escaping emotional magnitude might finally grasp that attachment was never the opponent. Exposure was never insufficiency. Profound sensation was never something to suppress. And when that comprehension materializes, he might examine all the instances he constructed separation from the individuals he genuinely cherished, and ultimately grasp the harm his silence generated. The individuals who awakened dormant components of consciousness. The individuals who demonstrated our capacity for extraordinary sensation. So if someone previously cherished you profoundly yet maintained separation, don't instantaneously presume you were undeserving of affection. Occasionally you triggered sensation so substantial for his compromised consciousness to manage appropriately. Occasionally your existence awakened emotions he'd invested years containing. Occasionally the attachment became so psychologically overwhelming that producing space appeared easier than accessibility, yet perpetually retain this culminating knowledge. Attachment realizes its fullest expression not when two individuals perpetually trigger mutual fears, yet when both deliberately select psychological development above defensive patterns. Genuine attachment necessitates courage. The courage to interact honestly, the courage to persist psychologically accessible, the courage to cease running from exposure, and the courage to continue when apprehension whispers that distance feels more secure. Because fundamentally the authentic tragedy isn't experiencing profound attachment. The authentic tragedy is permitting apprehension to silence an attachment that possessed capacity to fundamentally restructure everything. And somewhere currently exists consciousness separated not by attachment's non-existence, yet by inability to articulate it. Consciousness yearning across barriers erected from preceding hurting, individuals pretending they experience nothing while internally transporting whole universes. And possibly this is precisely why this communication contacted you now. Not coincidentally, yet because fundamentally you required hearing this perspective. Someone experiencing profound attachment maintains distance for a single reason. Emotional magnitude, when it reaches a certain depth, does something unusual to the human psyche. It does not arrive as a single feeling that can be neatly labeled or contained. Instead, it appears as a collision of opposites, affection and apprehension arising at the same time, pulling in different directions within the same heart. One part of the self leans forward toward closeness, drawn by warmth, recognition, and a sense of meaningful resonance. Another part retreats instinctively, unsettled by the intensity of being seen, felt, or emotionally implicated at such depth. The result is not confusion alone, but internal duality, a living tension between expansion and withdrawal. This duality is often misunderstood as incompatibility or emotional instability in the connection itself, when in truth it frequently reflects the depth of what has been activated inside the individual. When someone encounters a bond that touches something unprocessed within them, something ancient, sensitive, or long avoided, the nervous system does not always interpret it as safe, even if the experience is profoundly meaningful. What is unfamiliar is often translated as threatening, not because it is harmful, but because it exceeds the emotional patterns the person has previously learned to navigate. Avoidance seeks relief through distance. It interprets emotional intensity as something to regulate by stepping away, reducing engagement, or numbing the internal response. Courage, however, does something more demanding. It does not eliminate fear, nor does it suppress affection. Instead, it remains present within the contradiction. It allows both forces to exist without immediately resolving them into action. This is not passive endurance, but active self-awareness, the willingness to stay conscious while being emotionally stirred. Only those who are willing to encounter their own consciousness in this way begin to understand what such connections truly represent. On the surface, they may appear to be relationships between two individuals, but on a deeper level, they often function as catalysts for inner transformation. They do not simply offer companionship or emotional experience. They reveal patterns, trigger dormant fears, and bring unconscious material into awareness. In doing so, they disrupt the illusion of emotional neutrality, making it impossible to remain unchanged. This is why certain connections feel impossible to fully dismiss, even when distance is created. The mind may attempt to categorize them as finished, incomplete, or unsuitable, but the emotional imprint remains active because something within the self has been altered. What has been seen cannot be unseen. What has been felt at depth does not fully dissolve. Instead, it integrates, slowly reshaping how future emotional experiences are interpreted and felt. From this perspective, extraordinary connections are not designed to be simply fled when discomfort arises. Their intensity is not a flaw to be escaped, but a signal that something meaningful is being activated within the psyche. They challenge the individual to expand beyond familiar emotional boundaries, to recognize where fear is governing choice, and to differentiate between true incompatibility and internal resistance to vulnerability. To say they are engineered to reconstruct is to acknowledge that their purpose is not merely relational, but developmental. They often dismantle rigid emotional structures, exposing where protection has replaced openness and where self-preservation has limited the capacity for deeper connection. This reconstruction is not always comfortable. It can feel like instability, uncertainty, or emotional disruption. Yet beneath that surface turbulence, reorganization is occurring. Emotional intensity reshapes inner awareness by challenging old beliefs about love and safety, and when met with presence rather than avoidance, it fosters greater emotional clarity, balance, and integration. The most extraordinary connections are not defined by ease, but by their power to reveal hidden inner patterns, turning relationships into mirrors that deepen self-awareness and lead toward emotional wholeness through presence rather than avoidance.